Once legendary warriors in the ring, these former champions thrilled fans with their skill, power, and unforgettable moments. But where are they now? From Pernell Whitaker's tragic fate to Kostya Tszew's mysterious disappearance from boxing, from James Toney's heartbreaking decline to Terry Norris and Tommy Morrison's devastating battles outside the ring, Buster Douglas shocked the world once. But has life been kind to him since? In this video, we take a deep dive into the shocking, tragic, and untold realities of these former greats and where life has led them today. On February 11, 1990, James Buster Douglas shocked the world. As a 42-1 underdog, he did the impossible, knocking out the most feared man in boxing, Mike Tyson, and claiming the heavyweight championship. But while that night cemented his place in history, what followed was a steep decline, weight gain, health issues, and a near-death experience. Today, at 64, Douglas is far from the man who once stood atop the boxing world. This is the story of his meteoric rise, his tragic fall, and the painful reality he faces now. James Buster Douglas was never supposed to be a world champion. Born on April 7, 1960, in Columbus, Ohio, he grew up in a boxing household under the shadow of his father, Bill Douglas, a tough, no-nonsense professional fighter. From an early age, Buster had a love for sports, but it wasn't boxing that initially captured his attention. Unlike his father, who lived and breathed the sport, young Buster was more drawn to basketball. A tall and athletic teenager, he excelled on the court and even played at Coffeyville Community College in Kansas. His talent earned him a shot at playing for Mercyhurst University, and for a while, he saw his future in basketball rather than the brutal, unforgiving world of boxing. But destiny had other plans. The son of a fighter couldn't escape the sport forever. Eventually, Buster realized that basketball wouldn't be his path to greatness. His father's influence loomed large, and the pressures of carrying the Douglas name ultimately pulled him back into the ring. However, his relationship with his father was complicated. Bill Douglas was a tough man, both inside and outside the ring, and he never truly believed that his son had the fire to become a champion. That doubt would haunt Buster for much of his career, fueling his determination, but also weighing on his confidence. In 1981, Buster Douglas turned professional, stepping into a sport that had been dominated by legends. At 6 feet 4 inches with a solid jab, decent power, and underrated movement, he had the physical tools to succeed. But something was missing: consistency. He showed flashes of brilliance, but his performances often lacked focus and drive. In a sport where hunger and mental toughness were everything, Buster struggled to find his edge. Throughout the early 1980s, Douglas built his record against journeymen and mid-level contenders. His size and skills made him a tough opponent, but he was never viewed as a serious threat to the division's elite. A loss to David Bay in 1983 slowed his momentum, but he rebounded with solid wins, including a victory over former contender Greg Page in 1986. Then came the fight that nearly ended his championship dreams, a title shot against Toney Tucker for the vacant IBF heavyweight title in 1987. It was Buster's first chance at proving he belonged among the best, and for the first 9 rounds, he looked like a future champion. He controlled the fight with his jab, using his movement to frustrate Tucker. But then, the doubts crept in. The exhaustion set in. By the 10th round, Douglas had nothing left. Tucker took full advantage, punishing a fading Buster until the referee stopped the fight. It was the kind of loss that could have broken a fighter. His father, never one to hold back, was brutally critical, questioning his son's heart and determination. The boxing world dismissed Douglas as just another talented fighter who didn't have the mental toughness to be great. But Buster wasn't done. He regrouped, went back to the gym, and rededicated himself to the sport. He put together a string of victories, defeating quality opponents like Trevor Berbick and Oliver McCall. Slowly, he was climbing back up the rankings. He still wasn't considered elite, but he was proving that he had more to offer than most had given him credit for. And then, in 1989, he was given the opportunity of a lifetime, a fight against Mike Tyson, the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. No one gave him a chance. The odds makers oddsmakers set the betting lines at 42-1 against him. Even his own father had doubts. But what no one knew was that Buster Douglas had been quietly preparing for the fight of his life. This was his moment. This was his chance to silence the doubters, to step out of his father's shadow, and to shock the world. February 11th, 1990, Tokyo, Japan. It was supposed to be another routine destruction for the most feared man in boxing. Mike Tyson, the undefeated, undisputed heavyweight champion, had been tearing through the division, knocking out legends and contenders alike. He was seen as invincible, a force of nature who finished opponents before they even had a chance to fight back. And then there was James "Buster" Douglas. The oddsmakers set the betting lines at 42-1. To most, he was nothing more than a stepping stone, another victim lined up for Tyson's highlight reel. Even those who had followed Douglas's career closely knew his history of inconsistency. He had skill, yes, but did he have the heart, the mental toughness, the belief that he could do the impossible? Few thought so. But what no one understood was that this fight wasn't just about boxing for Buster Douglas, it was about something much deeper, a fight for more than just a title. Less than a month before the fight, Buster Douglas's mother, Lula Pearl Douglas, passed away. She had been his biggest supporter, the one person who always believed in him, even when the rest of the world doubted him. She was gone, and Douglas was devastated. But instead of breaking him, it fueled him. Douglas dedicated the fight to his mother's memory. This was no longer just a payday or an opportunity. This was his moment. The world may not have believed in Buster Douglas, but he did. The fight begins a different Buster Douglas. From the opening bell, it was clear this wasn't the same Douglas that fans had seen before. He came out sharp, focused, and determined. He pumped his jab, keeping Tyson at bay, using his reach and movement to control the fight. The Tokyo Dome, packed with over 40,000 fans, fell into stunned silence. Tyson wasn't walking through him like he had with every other opponent. Instead, Douglas was dictating the pace. Tyson, used to opponents wilting from fear, was frustrated. Douglas wasn't running or clinching. He was standing his ground, landing clean shots, and pushing Tyson backward. The rounds went by, and Douglas kept landing. Tyson, who was known for his incredible defense and head movement, looked slower, sluggish, unprepared. What was happening? Round 8, the uppercut that almost ended it. Tyson had struggled all fight, but great champions only need one moment. In round 8, that moment came. Tyson, finally closing the distance, uncorked a vicious right uppercut that sent Douglas crashing to the canvas. For a second, it seemed like the story would end like everyone expected, with another highlight reel knockout for Tyson. The referee began the count. Einde Karriere Douglas, his face swelling, his legs shaky, blinked. 8-9. He pushed himself up. He made it. The bell rang. He had survived, and something changed. Round 9. The beginning of the end for Tyson. Douglas came out like a man possessed. He wasn't just surviving, he was dominating. He battered Tyson with a brutal combination. For the first time in his career, Tyson looked lost. His eye was swelling shut, his punches were slow, and the aura of invincibility was slipping away. Douglas smelled blood. Round 10. The knockout heard around the world. With 35 seconds left in the round, Douglas launched a devastating uppercut that snapped Tyson's head back. Tyson staggered. Douglas didn't hesitate. He followed up with a flurry of punches. Left, right, left, each one landing cleanly. Tyson went down. The man who had never been knocked out, never been beaten, was on the canvas, fumbling for his mouthpiece. The referee began counting. Tyson tried to rise. His body refused. The count hit 10. It was over. Buster Douglas had done the impossible. The world is stunned. Commentators couldn't believe what they had just seen. The Tokyo Dome erupted in chaos. The invincible Mike Tyson had been knocked out. Buster Douglas was the new undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, the man who had been doubted his entire life, the man who had been overshadowed by his father, the man who had just lost his mother and fought in her memory, had just pulled off the greatest upset in boxing history. The world had changed in an instant. James "Buster" Douglas was now a legend. One moment, one fight, one victory. That was all it took for James "Buster" Douglas to go from an afterthought in boxing to the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. The man the world had dismissed as a 42-1 underdog had done what seemed impossible. He defeated Mike Tyson. Overnight, Douglas became a global superstar. His face was everywhere: talk shows, magazine covers, endorsement deals. Companies like Nike, Coca-Cola, and Sega rushed to sign deals with him. Sega even released a video game titled Buster Douglas Knockout Boxing, trying to capitalize on his sudden fame. For a brief moment, he was the most famous athlete in the world. But fame comes with expectations. Everyone wanted to know, could he do it again? Could he prove that beating Tyson wasn't just a fluke? The world wanted a rematch, but it never happened. Legal disputes, promotional conflicts, and Tyson's own issues derailed any plans for an immediate rematch. Tyson's camp protested the loss, claiming the referee had given Douglas a long count when he was knocked down in round 8. Don King, Tyson's promoter, demanded the fight be overturned, but after an investigation, the decision stood. Buster Douglas was the rightful champion. Instead of a rematch, Douglas took the biggest payday of his career, a title defense against Evander Holyfield for a guaranteed $24 million. It was the biggest fight of his life, and it was the fight that would end his reign before it even began. On October 25, 1990, just 8 months after shocking the world, Buster Douglas walked into the ring to defend his undisputed heavyweight title against Evander Holyfield. But something was wrong. The confident, hungry fighter who had taken the fight to Tyson was gone. In his place was a man who didn't look ready for battle. Douglas had ballooned up to 246 pounds, 15 pounds heavier than when he fought Tyson. His once chiseled frame had become soft. He looked slow, sluggish, unmotivated. And Holyfield noticed. From the opening bell, it was clear. Buster Douglas wasn't the same fighter. He moved slower. He didn't have the same energy. He barely threw punches. Then, in round 3, Holyfield ended it. Douglas tried to throw a slow uppercut, but he missed. Holyfield countered with a devastating right hand to the jaw. Douglas hit the canvas hard. He didn't even try to get up. The referee counted to 10. Just like that, Buster Douglas was no longer the champion. His reign lasted only 8 months, one of the shortest in heavyweight history. The Cinderella story had come crashing down. After losing the title, Buster Douglas disappeared. No longer the champion, no longer a superstar, and without the discipline of a fighter, his life spiraled out of control. His weight skyrocketed. Within a few years, Douglas weighed over 400 pounds. The same man who once stood in peak condition against Tyson was now struggling to walk upstairs. His health rapidly declined. By 1994, Douglas was rushed to the hospital in a diabetic coma. The world thought he was dead. Rumors spread that Buster Douglas had passed away. His body had shut down, overwhelmed by years of poor diet, depression, and lack of discipline. Doctors didn't think he would survive, and if he did, they told him he would never live a normal life again. The same man who once stood over a fallen Mike Tyson was now fighting for his life. While Evander Holyfield went on to become a 4-time heavyweight champion, and Mike Tyson eventually reclaimed part of his legacy, Buster Douglas faded from memory. His name became synonymous with failure. To many, he was just a one-hit wonder. A man who had one great night, won the championship, and then lost all motivation. Critics mocked him. Some called him the luckiest champion in history. Others called him the worst heavyweight champion of all time. For Buster Douglas, the dream had turned into a nightmare. He had reached the highest of highs, and now he had hit the lowest of lows. And at only 34 years old, it seemed his life was over. But Buster Douglas wasn't done fighting yet. For years, Buster Douglas had been written off. His reign as heavyweight champion lasted just 8 months. He went from the top of the world to rock bottom, losing his title, gaining over 200 pounds, and nearly dying from a diabetic coma. Doctors doctors told him he would never have a normal life again. But Douglas wasn't done fighting, because for the first time in years, he had something to prove. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about fame. This was about redemption. In 1996, after nearly 6 years away from the ring, Buster Douglas made a shocking announcement. He was coming back to boxing. At 36 years old, Douglas had shed over 150 pounds and returned to training. The same man who had once weighed over 400 pounds was now back in fighting shape. Most people laughed at the idea. The critics said he was too slow, too old, and too broken to ever be a serious contender again. But Douglas didn't care. He had a goal to prove that he was more than just a one-fight wonder. His comeback fight took place on June 22, 1996, against Toney. It wasn't a big fight. It wasn't against an elite opponent. But for Buster Douglas, just stepping back into the ring was a victory. And that night, he showed the world that he still had something left. Douglas won by knockout in the second round. Over the next 3 years, Douglas went on a winning streak, racking up victories against journeyman fighters. He wasn't facing world champions. He wasn't fighting in sold-out arenas. But he was winning. And for the first time in years, people started asking, could Buster Douglas fight for a title again? Could he reclaim his place in the heavyweight division? The answer came in 1997, when Douglas took a step up in competition. He faced Lou Savarese, a hard-hitting contender on the rise. And on June 24, 1997, Douglas's comeback hit a wall. Savarese knocked him out in the first round. It was clear Buster Douglas would never be heavyweight champion again. He fought 4 more times, winning against lower-tier fighters, but the dream of a second title reign was over. In 1999, Douglas retired for good with a professional record of 38 wins, 6 losses, and 1 draw. This time, he left the ring on his own terms. He wasn't a champion. He wasn't a legend, but he had proven something to himself. He was a fighter until the end. For years, Douglas had been defined by one night, his victory over Mike Tyson. But after retirement, he finally found something more. He stayed in his hometown of Columbus, Ohio, and dedicated himself to giving back to the community. Buster Douglas became a boxing trainer, mentoring young fighters and teaching them the lessons he had learned. He worked with amateur boxers and aspiring professionals, showing them how to stay disciplined, focused, and prepared for life inside and outside the ring. But his biggest impact wasn't just in boxing. He became a motivational speaker, traveling across the country and sharing his story of overcoming adversity. The message was simple: if I can get back up after being knocked down, so can you. He started working with youth programs, speaking at schools and juvenile centers, trying to help kids avoid the mistakes he made. He talked about the dangers of losing focus, the importance of hard work, and how success isn't just about talent, it's about discipline. For the first time in years, Buster Douglas wasn't running from his past. He was embracing it. He wasn't just the guy who beat Tyson. He was a survivor, a man who had been to the top of the world, fallen to the bottom, and climbed his way back up. He found peace in teaching, mentoring, and helping others. And finally, at long last, Buster Douglas had found a second chance. Buster Douglas will always be remembered for one night, February 11, 1990, when he shocked the world and did the impossible. But what happened after that? What became of the man who beat the most feared fighter on the planet? At 64 years old, Buster Douglas is not the same man who once stood over a fallen Mike Tyson. Time has taken its toll. The years of boxing, weight struggles, and health issues have left their mark. And today, the reality of his life is far from the fairy tale ending many would have expected. In the years following his retirement, Douglas continued to battle serious health problems. His weight ballooned to over 400 pounds at one point, leading to a near-fatal diabetic coma in 1994. Doctors told him that if he didn't change his lifestyle, he wouldn't live much longer. Though he fought his way back, losing weight and managing his diabetes, the damage had already been done. Today, at 64, Douglas still struggles with health issues. His speech is noticeably slower, his movement is more labored, and fans have started to question if he is showing early signs of neurological damage from years of taking punches. Interviews with Douglas in recent years show a man who is not as sharp as he once was. There's a slowness in his responses, a struggle to find words at times, a concerning reality that many former fighters face. But perhaps the hardest part for Douglas isn't the physical pain. It's the feeling of being forgotten. Despite once being on top of the world, Douglas never achieved the kind of financial security that other former champions did. Unlike Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, or George Foreman, who eventually made millions after boxing through business ventures and promotions, Douglas never had that kind of success. His $24 million payday from the Holyfield fight was mismanaged and spent. The endorsements and deals that once came pouring in disappeared just as quickly. And with no major business ventures or lasting sponsorships, Douglas was left living far from the multi-million-dollar wealth of his former rivals. He now lives a modest life in Columbus, Ohio, a world away from the glitz and glamour of boxing's biggest stars. While he still works as a trainer and mentor, his financial situation is nothing like the fortune he once held. For many fighters, the battle outside the ring is far tougher than anything they faced between the ropes. And for Douglas, that battle has been a lifelong struggle. Despite pulling off the greatest upset in boxing history, many still see Buster Douglas as a one-fight wonder. His brief reign as champion, his quick fall from the top, and his struggles afterward have led many to dismiss his legacy. He's not remembered like Muhammad Ali. He's not revered like Joe Louis or Rocky Marciano. Even among his own era, he's often overshadowed by Tyson, Holyfield, and Louis. To some, he was just a lucky fighter who had one great night. But to those who truly understand boxing, Douglas's story is more than just one fight. He was the man who proved that no fighter is unbeatable. He was the man who showed the world that with the right mindset, anything is possible. And despite everything, the struggles, the setbacks, and the hardships, he will always be the man who did what no one thought was possible. Buster Douglas will forever be the man who beat Mike Tyson. His victory that night in Tokyo was more than just a win. It was a moment that changed boxing history. But while his name is etched in history, his life after boxing has been a much tougher fight. Now at 64, he continues to battle the consequences of his sport, physically, financially, and emotionally. Yet, despite it all, he remains a symbol of boxing's unpredictable nature, a reminder that in the ring, anything can happen. A champion for one night, a man battling the consequences for a lifetime. Pernell "Sweet Pea" Whitaker was a once-in-a-generation talent, a defensive genius, an Olympic gold medalist, and a four-division world champion. In the ring, he was untouchable. His footwork, reflexes, and counterpunching made him one of the purest boxers the sport has ever seen. But outside the ropes, life was far less kind. Financial struggles, addiction, and personal demons followed him long after his fighting days were over. He battled the best fighters of his era and beat most of them, but the toughest fight of all came after the lights faded. In the end, tragedy struck, cutting his life short in an instant on a dark day in 2019. This is the story of Pernell Whitaker, and what you really didn't know about him. Pernell Whitaker was born on January 2nd, 1964, in Norfolk, Virginia, a city known for its tough streets and working-class roots. Growing up in poverty, he found himself surrounded by crime, drugs, and violence. But from a young age, Whitaker had a gift. His reflexes, balance, and hand-eye coordination were unlike anything his peers possessed. His mother, who named him after a Hollywood actor, never imagined that her son would go on to become one of the most technically brilliant boxers in history. Whitaker first laced up a pair of boxing gloves at the age of 8, showing an immediate knack for the sport. Under the guidance of local trainers, he developed a slick, elusive style that emphasized movement, defense, and counterpunching. While many young fighters focused on aggression, Whitaker's approach was different. He preferred to make his opponents miss, and then make them pay. His ability to slip punches, roll his shoulders, and anticipate attacks was far beyond his years. As an amateur, Whitaker was a phenomenon. He competed in nearly 500 fights, losing only a handful of times. His speed, footwork, and precision made him almost untouchable in the ring. By the time he reached his his late teens, he was already considered one of the best amateur boxers in the world. He won multiple national championships and caught the attention of the boxing elite. His defining moment as an amateur came in 1984 when he represented the United States at the Los Angeles Olympics. The U.S. boxing team that year was one of the greatest in history, featuring future world champions like Evander Holyfield, Meldrick Taylor, and Mark Breland. But even among such elite company, Whitaker stood out. His performances were dazzling as he used his defensive mastery and lightning-quick counters to dominate his competition. In the final, he delivered a near-perfect display of boxing skill to win the Olympic gold medal in the lightweight division. With an Olympic gold medal around his neck and the boxing world at his feet, Whitaker had officially arrived. He was already being compared to legends like Willie Pep and Nicolino Locke for his defensive wizardry. The transition to the professional ranks seemed inevitable, and many believed he was destined to become one of the all-time greats. After turning professional in late 1984, Whitaker wasted no time in proving that his amateur success would translate into the paid ranks. Unlike many Olympic gold medalists who struggle with the shift to professional boxing, Whitaker's style was already tailor-made for the longer, more grueling fights. His footwork, head movement, and impeccable timing made him an elusive target, while his counterpunching ability allowed him to dictate the pace of fights with ease. He fought 7 times in his first 10 months as a pro, quickly racking up wins against solid opposition. Despite his growing reputation, some critics wondered if his defensive style would work against the elite fighters of the lightweight division. The answer came in his 12th fight when he faced Roger Mayweather, a former world champion with knockout power and significant experience. Many expected Whitaker to struggle, but instead, he put on a masterclass, dominating Mayweather with his superior footwork, ring IQ, and pinpoint accuracy. That victory signaled to the boxing world that Whitaker was the real deal. He continued his rise, defeating top contenders and positioning himself for a world title shot. His chance came in 1989 against Greg Hogan for the IBF lightweight championship. Hogan was a rugged, hard-nosed fighter who was expected to test Whitaker's resolve, but what followed was a one-sided clinic. Whitaker showcased every aspect of his game. His jab was sharp, his combinations were crisp, and his defense was nearly impenetrable. He cruised to a unanimous decision victory, capturing his first world title in dominant fashion. At just 25 years old, Pernell Whitaker was now a world champion, but more than that, he was already regarded as one of the most skilled fighters in the sport. His ability to make world-class opponents look ordinary was something rarely seen in boxing. The lightweight division had a new king, and the rest of the boxing world was about to find out just how special Sweet Pea really was. By the early 1990s, Pernell Whitaker had established himself as one of the most skilled and elusive fighters in boxing history. After capturing the IBF lightweight title in 1989, he was on a mission to prove that he was the best 135-pound fighter in the world. His goal was clear: unify the division and leave no doubt about his supremacy. His first major statement came against Jose Luis Ramirez in 1989. The two had fought the year before, with Whitaker appearing to dominate, but he was controversially handed his first career loss via split decision. Most observers believed he had been robbed, and now he had the chance to set the record straight. This time, there was no controversy. Whitaker completely outclassed Ramirez over 12 rounds, earning a lopsided unanimous decision and becoming the WBC lightweight champion. With 2 major belts in hand, Whitaker continued to clear out the division. In August 1990, he faced Azuma Nelson, the reigning WBC super featherweight champion, moving up in weight. Nelson was a future Hall of Famer, known for his durability and aggressive style, but he was no match for Whitaker's defensive wizardry. Whitaker controlled the fight with ease, making Nelson miss repeatedly while peppering him with sharp counters. He secured another dominant decision victory, adding another elite name to his resume. By 1991, Whitaker completed his goal, defeating Juan Nazario to capture the WBA lightweight title and become the first undisputed lightweight champion since Roberto Duran in the late 1970s. This achievement solidified his place among the greats, and by the end of 1989, he was named the Ring Magazine's Fighter of the Year. During his his lightweight reign, Whitaker became known for making world-class opponents look amateurish. Fighters simply could not hit him. His head movement, reflexes, and footwork were unparalleled, and opponents often grew frustrated as they swung at air. It wasn't just about avoiding punches. Whitaker would make his opponents miss, and then counter with precise, punishing shots of his own. He was a master of psychological warfare inside the ring, embarrassing fighters to the point where they became hesitant to throw punches at all. His final fights at lightweight only added to his legend. He defeated Jorge Paez, a charismatic former featherweight champion, in 1992 in another masterful performance. By this time, Whitaker was widely recognized as the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world. There were no more challenges left at 135 pounds, and it was time to chase greatness in higher weight divisions. After moving up to junior welterweight, Whitaker continued his dominance, capturing the IBF title, but his biggest challenge was yet to come. In 1993, he agreed to face Julio Cesar Chavez, one of the most feared and revered boxers of all time. Chavez was undefeated, boasting a record of 87-0, and was considered by many to be the best fighter in the world. The fight was set at welterweight, giving Whitaker the opportunity to claim another world title, while also proving he was superior to the Mexican legend. The bout, held at the Alamodome in Texas, was one of the most anticipated fights of the decade. The pro-Chavez crowd of over 60,000 fans created an electric atmosphere. But once the fight started, it became clear that Whitaker was in complete control. For 12 rounds, Whitaker put on a defensive masterclass. Chavez, known for his relentless pressure and devastating body punches, simply couldn't touch him. Whitaker's movement, slick counters, and dazzling footwork made Chavez look slow and one-dimensional. Whitaker landed the cleaner punches, controlled the pace, and neutralized Chavez's aggression at every turn. When the final bell rang, there was no doubt in the minds of those watching. Whitaker had dominated. It was supposed to be the crowning moment of his career, a victory that would go down in history as one of the greatest performances ever. But then came the judge's decision, a majority draw. The crowd erupted in disbelief. The decision was met with immediate outrage from boxing experts and fans alike. Most ringside observers scored the fight heavily in Whitaker's favor, and even Chavez himself appeared surprised. It was one of the most blatant robberies in boxing history, and Whitaker was denied what should have been his signature victory. Despite the injustice, the fight cemented Whitaker's legacy. He had taken on one of the greatest fighters of all time and made him look ordinary. The controversy only added to his legend, proving that even when the system was against him, he was still the superior fighter. Rather than dwell on the Chavez robbery, Whitaker continued his pursuit of greatness. He moved up to welterweight and, in 1993, defeated Buddy McGirt to win the WBC title. McGirt was an elite champion, but Whitaker's superior skills overwhelmed him. The victory made Whitaker a four-division champion, further solidifying his place among the all-time greats. At welterweight, Whitaker continued to dominate, defending his title against multiple challengers. But by the mid-1990s, the wear and tear of a long career were beginning to show. While still a defensive genius, his reflexes were starting to slow ever so slightly, and younger fighters were beginning to catch up. His final major test came in 1997 against the sport's rising superstar, Oscar De La Hoya. At just 24 years old, De La Hoya was being groomed as boxing's next big thing. Whitaker, now 33, was no longer at his peak, but he was still the reigning welterweight champion. The fight was seen as a passing of the torch moment. If De La Hoya could beat Whitaker convincingly, it would signal the end of an era. However, Whitaker had no intention of making it easy for the young star. Despite his age and declining reflexes, he gave De La Hoya one of the toughest fights of his career. Whitaker's defense was still dazzling, and he landed sharp counters throughout the fight. Many observers believed he had done enough to win, but once again, the judges ruled against him, awarding De La Hoya a controversial decision victory. The loss marked the beginning of the end for Whitaker. His ability was still there, but he was no longer untouchable. The speed and sharpness that had defined his prime were fading, and the younger generation was beginning to take over. While he would fight a few more times, it was clear that his reign as the best pound-for-pound fighter was over. Still, by the time his career began winding down, there was no doubt Pernell Whitaker was one of the greatest boxers of all time. He had dominated multiple weight classes, embarrassed some of the best fighters in the world, and redefined the art of defense. But as his career faded, so too did the stability in his life. The struggles that awaited him outside the ring would prove to be far more difficult than any opponent he had ever faced. Pernell Whitaker's career had been defined by speed, precision, and defense. But no fighter, no matter how skilled, can outrun time. By the late 1990s, Whitaker was past his prime. His reflexes, once his greatest weapon, were beginning to dull. He could still make opponents miss, but not with the same ease. More importantly, he couldn't counter with the same sharpness. His first major sign of decline came in 1997 against Oscar de la Hoya. While he put up a strong performance, the fight exposed that he was slowing down. He had lost a step, and against younger, stronger fighters, that was enough to make the difference. Still, he remained one of the most respected names in boxing and continued to chase greatness. In 1999, he took on undefeated power puncher Felix Trinidad in what would be his last significant fight. Whitaker, once the untouchable master of defense, found himself struggling against Trinidad's relentless pressure. Early in the fight, he suffered a broken jaw, but like a true warrior, he refused to quit. He battled through the pain, but it was clear